And in terms of what we wanted to cover today, we've got a few little nuggets just around our experiences around the kind of design of models for scaling up of people services. We want to talk a little bit around our experiences of individually tailoring for the different spaces that you're working with versus kind of economies of scale, and just a little bit around diversification, and then some of our learnings around times and costs and how we can think about that when you're looking at scale services, and then managing some of the changing requirements as well. So we'll be talking a little bit around some of our kind of thinking and strategy, and Paul will give you some live examples of some of the stuff that we've done within SCW. Please do shout if the slides go again. I can see them shared, but if they go, let me know. Okay, so just for those of you, I'm hoping lots of you will be aware, if you're not, just to give people a bit of a recap around the guide to scaling people services. So this was launched a few weeks ago by NHS England, and we're going to pop the link in the chat, but there's a link to the Futures site, really big document, the guide itself. There's a PowerPoint pack that's got about 200 slides in it, so really big, really comprehensive. And it talks about the kind of case for change, the different delivery models that people can use, and roadmaps to scaling and kind of enabling technology. So there's loads and loads of information there. It is quite a lot. And they talk about lots of different areas that can be scaled. So looking at some of those traditional HR operations spaces like recruitment and payroll, but also looking at things like temporary staffing, L&D, right the way around to staff benefits and occupational health and wellbeing. So for the purpose of the call today, we're going to focus our conversations around our experience in the HR operations space. So Paul will give you a bit of information in a moment around what that looks like for us. We do also deliver at scale L&D, and we do work around temporary staffing as well. So we're doing quite a lot at the moment on high cost agency spend reduction. So if you are interested in learning about any more of those areas in a separate spotlight, then do feel free to pop in the chat and let us know, and we can set something else up to talk through some of those. But do go and take a look at the document. There's a lot in there and a lot to digest. But there is a little booklet as well that you may be able to get hold of if you know anyone who's been to one of the launch events that happened around the country. So we went to some of the launch events, and there was a lot of people in the rooms just asking questions about how do we go about doing this. And so, as I say, we've got systems partners across the SCW geography. We just thought it might be helpful to share some of our experience. So a little bit around people solutions in SCW. So we work across a range of people specialties. So from that core kind of HR people operations space through to people consultancy. So that traditional kind of ER, change management, and those kind of advisory spaces. We've got teams working on organisational development and workforce and EDI and wellbeing as well, but we're enabled by and supported by blended expertise from across the organisation. So we work very closely with our business intelligence analysts, with people in our digital spaces, and so that really gives us quite a lot of opportunity to do some quite creative things. We operate a couple of different models. So we provide a range of services under service level agreements to a range of ICBs and primary care spaces, and a level of activity to some providers as well across the South Central and West geography. But we also then offer a range of additional project programme portfolio kind of management in lots of these spaces as well. So we've got kind of teams that people can access on kind of an ad hoc basis. We do operate from kind of local up to national level, which is quite helpful in sharing expertise and helping understand and translating national strategy through to local delivery. So as I say, we thought it'd be helpful to share some of this experience with you. And Paul's just going to give you a little intro about the people operations space.
Hi everyone. So just to give you a flavour of what my area consists of, so I've got four main groups that we work on. So obviously there's recruitment, so campaign management, a range of legislative checks and onboarding, then through to the pay services, so full end-to-end payroll service we can deliver, and with data input into ESR for payment, and then obviously e-expenses, so we manage and run e-expenses, and then we have a support service. So what I tend to refer to it as is HR triage. So it's the first port of call, so call center style HR service with the more informal elements of people life cycle stuff. So where's this policy? How do I interpret this? And then what the team will do is then they will triage out to the HR professionals where needed. But hopefully we can look to resolve at least 60% of issues centrally. So it's a really good service. Also, it supports Job Evaluation Bureau, where we're becoming quite popular in job evaluation, because job evaluation is a bit of a dying art, which people are interested in, but nobody really wants to sort of sit down and do. And then the final element of my empire is the people information and systems team. So looking at provision of HR dashboards, HR information, HR people information, and some ESR developmental elements. So looking at modules of ESR that we are not using that we could use to streamline. So there is a view, a moral sort of view that we should be using all elements of ESR where we can, because it streamlines and it is the single point of truth. So they're my 4 areas that I try and box up into separate areas. So where people might only want support with recruitment, that's fine, or we can do the whole gambit.
Thanks, Paul. And we'll talk a little bit around some of the models and areas you might want to consider and explore as we go through. Get my thing to move on 1 second. So in terms of learning from our experience and areas that we wanted to try and just touch on today and give you some things to think about. So I think one of the learnings that we've really advised people to consider is really considering the extent of your kind of long-term ambition when you're looking at your target operating model. I know often when people are scaling services, it's that we've got maybe an organisation who's already doing a small bit, and then you come together and combine and add on, and it can become quite an organic an emergent growth. Which really works well to a point, and that kind of incremental growth and development allows for that flexibility that you can kind of scale your resource as you go. But there is something just around considering the sort of large scale of where you want to go and what you think you want to do in terms of volume, and really thinking about in your operating model design from the outset how you might go around managing and delivering that. So considering some of the enabling technologies, which we'll touch on a little further on, to manage your workflows, to manage your call volumes, to support with your KPI and your performance data. So really thinking about, where do we want to go with this? How big is it going to be? And actually starting with that end position in mind and working backwards, and really investing in those early stages in the technology rather than trying to kind of retrofit. But also then considering, as I say, your kind of, depending on how your costs are going to be split, which again, we'll touch on in a little while, what KPIs and performance data will you need to kind of manage the split of costs across the partners that you're delivering with. I think a really key principle is around agree your kind of your design principles with the partners that you're working with. And you'll see as we go further on, there's different kind of principles that we'll discuss and that we'll talk about that we've kind of learned from during our experience. And then obviously at the moment, there's lots of talk and lots of movement around the use of bots and chatbots, and we've been doing some work on in SCW around where that fits into our process. So it's really worth considering those points up front as well. So I think one of the key things when you're looking at these kind of at scale models is, I think people recognise that really the benefits come from the economies of scale, and that you have to be considerate with that economies of scale kind of approach at top of mind. But actually, in reality, what often comes through is organisations are all working very differently. They will have kind of individual needs, whether it's approaches, policies, branding, identification. And so I think one of the key things we'd advise people to think about is, how can you blend those two things together? How can you keep the value of the economies of scale, but also supporting the need for individuality in relation to an organisational's requirements? So Paul will talk in a minute, but we just wanted to touch on some of the ways that can be done. So you can use technology that's built around skeletons that are designed for at scale, but that allow for personalization at an organizational level. And Paul will give you some example of the ones that we use in a moment. You could look at different models for access. So as Paul mentioned, I think there's the approaches that's mentioned in the guide around complete kind of outsourcing of all your services, or you might want to just ask that your shared centre provides just some elements of delivery for everyone, or you may want to keep it slightly more flexible than that actually there's a menu of services and solutions and organisations can pick and choose from that. So again, it's worth considering in that design principle space, kind of what your systems partners might need and want from the way that you approach that. And then I think there's just a consideration, particularly as we're looking more at system-based working and reciprocal sharing of people and passporting and all those kind of things. Is there a further opportunity that you could align sort of shared policies, which again, from our space, we've inherited some policies nationally, and that does make the kind of the scaling and the alignment a little bit easier. So I'll just hand to Paul for a minute, who will just talk to you about one of our tools that we've used.
So one of the tools that we use, and so we created a Consult HR portal, which is available. I tend to refer it to as the fifth member of the band, because it's a tool that is there 24/7. And what we've done is we've created a number of toolkits to support people around some of the basic stuff. So around recruitment, so what do I need to do? When do I need to do it? And just making those key points around the difficult things, looking at the policies, and just some of the key life cycle stuff that managers will need to do that they don't necessarily need to speak to somebody. What we are doing is we're developing, because obviously some of the content of some of these things is quite dry, and there's lots of things to look at. So we're looking at creating more sort of videos and some more visuals around how do you do some of these things. So looking at sort of like the BBC News in terms of, what do I need to know in the next 60 seconds? So looking at some of those key points that people just need to know there and then. What do they need to do? How do I need to log into expenses? How do I raise a recruitment? How do I write an advert? So those sorts of things we found really useful for people. So we're just building on that knowledge and that expertise around what sort of questions are being asked on the support team around how do I, and that we're trying to put into a sort of a portal that can be used, as I say, 24/7.
And I think one of the key things around the portal that we use is it does have that skeleton that it can be personalised for each organisation. So if you can see that the screenshot that we've got here is from the SCW perspective, you'll see we've got the SCW logo in the top. Actually, if you logged on as one of our clients, you wouldn't see the SCW logo. I don't think you see there's ways of kind of personalising it for your own organisation. Which is really quite helpful. It allows for that local feel, but actually you're using a skeleton model that supports the scale. And so we wanted to just touch on then diversification as well. So, we've talked about a little bit about the economies of scale and that principle of, the value comes in being at scale. There will be times that you do need individuality, which we've covered, but also, when is it good to look at diversifying what you do? So, Paul will give you a couple of examples of where we've done that, where we've looked at introduction of different systems, and so that we can helpfully diversify in order to support additional organisations without losing the value of the economies of scale that you've already established. So Paul, do you want to touch on a couple of the examples that we've got?
Yeah, so the couple of examples that we've used is one around the recruitment process. So back when COVID hit, we supported quite a large number of acute trusts with the support around recruitment and ramping up certain roles. And we found quite quickly that a lot of the acute trusts had moved over to Track as a tool. So the SCW made a decision to go over to Track as a tool so that we can also have experience of using not only NHS jobs but Track. So it gives us that flexibility around support that we can use. So the teams are under my control are very experienced in both modules. They're both very different, but they both sort of do the same thing. And then the other thing that we invested in, so there were a number of PCN clients that wanted support with payroll. So there was a real lack of payroll support around some of the healthcare, but not necessarily NHS employees who are not allowed to be used on ESR. So we invested in a payroll tool that we can provide end-to-end payroll provision for clients that are within the healthcare, but not necessarily deemed as NHS employees. So that's been really useful, and we've been able to, with our NHS badge, use the same sort of same processes that we use as an NHS employer. So that's worked really well.
Thanks, Paul. And I think one of the critical things is we've been quite selective on when we diversify, and really quite strategically thinking about that. So as Paul mentioned, you know, it's either looking at what's happening in the market and in the partners and what the ask is that's happening around you, and kind of seeing that we need to continue what we're doing rather than switch to another system, add a second system in. But also then looking at the opportunities of the expansion and the growth and building and offering those services to more organisations. And as I say, for us, acknowledging that working with primary care or with other organisations outside of the core NHS who aren't on ESR for payroll, that actually having a separate payroll system would be beneficial. So that's definitely one worth, again, thinking about in terms of your design principles. I think the other thing that we spend a bit of time looking at and thinking about is kind of your costs and your apportioning. And again, I think you definitely consider that in your target operating model and your design principles. There's lots of different ways that you can look to cost models. So whether it is, you know, a direct kind of service level agreement type approach where all of your partners that you're working with, you know, you work on maybe the size of their number of employees, or you could look at a kind of volume and a demand basis and have a kind of price per activity. So there's kind of different kind of flexible models, but it's definitely worth considering your commercial approach and how you're going to contract and what your kind of offer is at the start. And again, I think using that technology space to kind of help you understand and make sure that when things change. So we would often have clients and we might agree a certain amount of activity with them. And as you know, things change and we might be suddenly dealing with extra campaigns as we did with COVID when we were supporting mass vaccination recruitment or, you know, going through organisational change. There will be flux in your activities and your volumes, and how does your pricing model and your partnership agreement with the organisations that you're working with kind of allow for that, so that the system that every system partner feels like they're paying fairly for the activity that they're getting support for. And again, there's a couple of ways that we think you could explore for using that. So there's kind of tech-enabled support. If you're looking at kind of volume metrics, there's technology like Top Desk. So that will measure and hold kind of the volume of calls you're getting, the volume of emails you're getting, and monitor all your activity on a volume basis per client or per system partner. But also then we've got actually in SCW an in-house kind of time recording, and so we can kind of log how we've spent our time, and that means that then when we come to actually then have a look at where our time's being spent and how the time's being spent, you've got a much more kind of accurate picture. And so it's really worth considering how you kind of look at that commercial approach between your system partners. And then also considering how you're going to allow for that flex and that flux. Is it that you have some volume caps and then you have some ad hoc pricing that goes around and above that, or is it fixed shared cost, or it's really worth considering at the outset. And I think one of the other key elements that has been really, really vital, things change, you know, there will be, as we've talked about, the kind of the conversations that crop up around, well, you know, my organisation has this particular need at this particular time, or we want to be doing something slightly different from the organisation next door or from one of our system partners. And so I think having strong kind of relationship management is really key. So, you know, the way that we've managed that is that we've got a range of people business partners, but also we've got a range of SME leads who are subject matter experts in workforce and OD and HR ops, who have those conversations with the system partners that we're working with. And I think having that strong relationship is really critical when you're coming across some of those difficult conversations of, I can absolutely see that you want to have an individualized or a personalized approach here, but actually that does put the balance out for the economies of scale. And just worth thinking about again in your design principles initially around managing exits. So what if, you know, what's your tie-in period if you're going to come together as a partnership agreement? How do you continue your service and ensure you've got a robust service delivery if a system partner wants to exit the partnership? And just maybe planning for that from the outset, just so that you don't end up with a kind of disrupted service delivery, but also to maintain those system partnerships relationships, which are going to be really critical if particularly if you're working in quite close proximity, and you've got other, you know, relationships that you're looking to maintain. I love this quote. It's one of the organisational change principles when you're looking at stakeholder management. I'm sure lots of you will have seen it if you're change management qualified. But you know, you can forget important stakeholders, but they won't forget you. And I think that's really critical in terms of that relationship management and the approach to relationships. And I think the other learning for us, in particularly in the operational space, when you're looking at things like payroll, when you look at things like people's contracts, you know, it's a really sensitive space for individuals. You know, people are going through, it's their pay, it's their roles, it's you know, they're going through maybe changes of jobs, and it's, you know, it's a really delicate and a really sensitive time for people. And I think often you don't always get thanked when you're doing a really good job, but the minute there's a challenge or a potential issue, then actually it escalates very quickly. So it can be escalated highly. So I think just making sure that you know, you're very aware of that and very responsive in terms of reducing the risk, and also dealing with proactively with any challenges that are cropping up. And so in terms of our nuggets and things we wanted to share, that's just a little taster of some of the experiences that we've had and some of the learning that we've had along the way. Haven't checked the chat yet, but very open to taking questions if you want to pop your hand up, and Paul and I will have a glance at the chat as we go through as well. So do feel free to pop your hand up if there's anything you'd like to ask. Oh, Zach.
Perhaps a comment more than a question, and I think you did touch on it in your final slides, and that's the importance of relationships, because going into any kind of joint venture does require a level of trust and collaboration. So I think getting the service model right, getting the target operating model right, being efficient and good at what you do is really, really important. But fundamentally, you know, working together comes down to relationships. So I think not to underestimate the importance of making sure you set good collaborative principles, and that the governance, because there will be different types of governance depending on the model you're going for. So if it's a lead provider providing services on behalf of a number of partners is different to if you're outsourcing it to a commercial entity, and that's going to be a different source of governance as well. But each of those will be built on having good, trusted relationships where people feel, you know, they're being heard.
Thanks, Zach. That's really appreciate you saying that. I love your OD lens coming in behind that. And I think one of the approaches that we've tried to use when we're having these conversations with system partners, more widely when we're supporting organisations and systems to come together, is actually we're using quite a lot of approaches at the moment around system convening, and things like the art of participatory leadership. So really bringing system leaders together in a way that's creative and slightly different, and allows safe space for some of those conversations, as Zach said, to look at actually your principles for collaboration and the kind of the approach to that before you get into the details of models, etc. Are you all on the same, have you all got the same view of the aims of this? Are you all wanting to go in the same direction? What are the challenges and barriers? And then really kind of looking at what we're trying to do and deliver, and are we all engaged and bought in the same way as well? So we've got lots of those kind of principles and approaches that we support organisations when they're looking at that kind of system integration and system working. Thanks, Zach. Let's have a little look in the chat. So we've got a question around process in relation to bots and the benefits. So Paul, do you want to just give a little bit of a snapshot around where we're incorporating bots into our kind of operational processes and how that's looking?
Yeah, so we're dipping our toe in the bot technologies pool. So we are looking, so we're in the midst of building a couple of bots around data input in terms of pay. So looking at new starters, for example, and changes and terminations. So doing the sort of mundane sort of data entry bit that will release. So it's not a cost saving element. It's around streamlining the processes and taking away the mundane data entry to allow the teams to do more checking, more different elements of the role, because obviously we're very heavily audited as an organisation. So we're starting with that, but as the process is going on and we're starting to build, because it's quite an intense piece of work to build sort of processes, so because obviously you've got to write everything down that needs to be done. So the team are thinking about different things that now could be automated through. The other thing that we are looking at is a chatbot. So looking at chatbots to add on to our portals, again, fifth member of the boy band, to be able to just sit in the background and be able to support from afar. So very much virtual, very much, hopefully supportive around that. So that's our next venture around chatbots. So it's working well at the moment, but again, it's proof of concept as well.
Thanks, Paul. And yes, Sally, there is an element around manual keying, I suppose, and manual intervention. And I think the other thing that we've learned around it, so as Paul mentioned, it is something that can run 24/7 once you've got the processes set up. And I think when we've explored the areas like chatbots, actually, they're a lot more sophisticated and advanced in their capability than I think possibly people realise. So you can actually use a chatbot to interface into several systems to kind of update your systems. So it can act as that kind of, again, improving your data entry and validating, I suppose if you're looking at things like woven scores, you can use it to kind of help improve some of your data quality, but they're very interactive. And I think the other element around the bots is they're very inclusive, so they can be tailored to work across multiple languages, depending on the kind of end user. So there's a whole load of benefits in that chatbot space kind of on its own that I don't think I'd really appreciated until we'd looked at this in a little bit more detail, but particularly that kind of system updating rather than just the but often the chatbots are there to give you that, triaging, aren't they, and to kind of signpost you and support. But actually, the level of sophistication that's there around the bots, as I say, in terms of whether it's updating change of addresses and things like that, there's a whole load of opportunity. So if you haven't looked at chatbots and you're looking at systems, then it's definitely worth a little bit of a look. Anyone else? I can't see that we've got any other questions in the chat. Oh, sorry, I've got an issue gone on with my slide there. I think I'm not quite sure what's happened, but Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll close things up. I know people are coming in over lunch, and I'm sure keen to grab some lunch or a cup of tea before your next session. But thank you very much for joining us. If you do want to have a conversation at all with Paul or I or one of the team to understand more about our experiences or how SCW might be able to support you further, then please do reach out to us, and we'll be sharing the pack and the information afterwards. But also, if there's anything in here that you think it would be helpful to share in terms of further deep diving or looking at some of those other topics like bank and agency establishment and high cost agency spend or learning and development, then do give us a shout and we'll set up some supplementary sessions. But very nice to see you all. Have a good rest of the day, and hopefully the sunshine comes out for you.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.
Nice to see you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.